Welcome to this special episode of Yesterday's Capers. In this episode, I'll be talking to content creator and host of the podcast Old School Late, Patricia Miranda. We talk about how she got started with her podcast, and naturally, we talk cartoons. This was a really fun chat, and I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Patricia. And I enjoyed talking about Sailor Moon, Hey Arnold, and As Told by Ginger again. And I'm sure you will too. So without further ado, here it is. I'm delighted to say that joining me is Patricia Miranda, who is a podcaster, content creator, and she has her own podcast all about As Told by Ginger called We're In Between. Hey Patricia, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
And thank you for reaching out to me. And I just wanted to kind of ask, did you listen to the podcast in full? And were you, once you kind of saw that there was another podcast about As Told by Ginger, were you kind of anticipating that maybe someone might mention We're In Between? Or
to be quite honest, no. Most people don't really know about our podcast. The podcast that Casey Reed, Ashley Wittenkeller, and myself did almost 3 years ago. No, it's been about 3 years since we did it because we did it back in 2017. But no, I mean, whenever people talk about As Told by Ginger, they just talk about that, it was a show that aired on Nickelodeon. But no, they never referred to the We're In Between podcast or the Vice article that you and Paul talked about on the show. No, never. I mean, I was quite surprised when I listened to it. It's like, oh, wow, somebody actually, know that we existed.
No, because obviously, as we were kind of talking about prior, was As Told by Ginger wasn't necessarily a show that I knew a great deal about. And so obviously before every show for my podcast, what I kind of want to do is do as much background research on the show. If there was any articles about the show that would kind of give an analysis or even an opinion. So I came across the Vice article and I read that and I'm like, whoa, is this show that deep? I just thought, is it not just about cartoons and what have you? But I'm reading that and then I'm obviously reading about you guys and We're In Between. And I think some of the things that you had to say about the show was really, really good. And it reflected when I was watching the show. So I could see what you was talking about and I could see how it was such a show that that people would watch and would resonate with and could relate to, and they were dealing with a lot of issues that girls will deal with in school, and even boys. The whole idea of growing up in that sort of middle school / high school. I think for you guys here in the UK, we're just lumped in from 7th grade to 11th is high school for us, so we don't even have a
middle school.
We don't even have a junior high or a junior high or middle school here in England. So that was quite an interesting thing about your kind of article and what you were saying about As Told by Ginger.
Yeah, and the general consensus for a lot of people is that most of them probably didn't watch As Told by Ginger when it first came out, probably due to multiple reasons, one of which they don't like the Klasky Chupo style of drawing, because Gabor Chupo is of Hungarian descent, and a lot of the animators and the artists, they come from that European background, and they would draw their characters in a very unique way. I want to say it. I don't want to be the 1 billionth person who says, oh, the animation is gross and ugly and it scares me and it gives me nightmares. I'm not going to do that.
I don't think it's bad. I think it's all right.
A lot of people. There are a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, when I did As Told by Ginger month, which was a precursor to We're In Between, it was back in 2015 when it was celebrating its 15th anniversary. Uh-huh. And a lot of people were saying that one of the main reasons why they didn't watch As Told by Ginger was because they just couldn't stand the fact that their heads were just so huge and the lips were all the way down to their chin. I mean, there were people who literally did not watch the show because of that.
Wow. That's crazy because, for me, if I think of Klasky Supo. I think Rugrats. I think Wild Thornberrys, and even like a little bit when he did The Simpsons. And I was like,
Yeah,
for me, it was fine. I didn't think, oh, they look weird or. I mean, you can tell it is a Klasky Supo cartoon.
it
Like
is.
we like Paul and I picked out some few kind of characteristics that kind of made it stand out, but it wasn't like looked at it and thought, oh, like oh, it doesn't look right or anything like that. But it was
I think it depends on the generation that grew up with it. Like if you have a generation that never saw a Klasky Chupo program when they were growing up, and then
yeah
they look back on it, they'll be like, "Wow, that looks really weird. Like why are their heads so lumpy, and why are their mouths all the way down to their chin?" I think that like especially with the newer generation, they might look at it. It's like, "Oh wow, that's really weird." And I think that for even artists, people who are going into the art industry and they're familiar with a certain art style, because I mean, art styles and art designs, they change every generation. There's this amazing guy on YouTube by the name of Harry Partridge, otherwise known as Happy Harry. He did this great, showcase of different animation styles from each decade, where he drew from like, all the way from like the 20s to the 30s to the 40s, all the way up until today. And you can tell that it's each of them are very different, like the smiles and the way the eyes look and everything. It just goes to show you how each generation of animation is just completely different than the previous one. I think that maybe for the younger generation, they just didn't care for it. But another reason why they didn't was because, let's be honest, when it comes to Klasky Chupo, you know them for Rugrats or for Our Real Monsters or Rocket Power or Wild Thornberrys, or for All Grown Up. But As Told by Ginger is not one that immediately pops into your head because I mentioned this before that Klasky Chupo Nicktoons have an appeal for some people. Like Rugrats is more for the general audience. That's why I think it became a massive hit, because both boys and girls could watch it in a time in which cartoons were divided between boys could watch this cartoon and girls could watch this cartoon. Like we've completely changed since then. And Our Real Monsters, they're for the people who like the gross out stuff and like creepy monsters, and Wild Thornberrys for people who like nature, or Rocket Power who were into skateboarding. So they appeal to a certain audience. And the fact that we had slice of life cartoons such as Doug and Hey Arnold, and even I guess slightly to an extent Rocket Power, that they were about kids. As Told by Ginger was more focused on teenagers. And at a time that, Nickelodeon was known for the kids network, maybe teenagers were kind of like outgrown Nickelodeon at that time. I was when it, I only saw like a handful of shows when it came out. Like I saw that. I saw Caitlin's Way. I saw Taina. I didn't really see too much of the Nicktoons. But I think that the kids who were watching it, the ones that they were probably marketing towards, they didn't really understand it. It's a show that you don't really get when you watch it the first time.
So if we kind of start from the beginning,
All right.
and if you just want to tell listeners who you are, what you're about, and how you got to being a content creator.
Sure. My name is Patricia Miranda. I am the co-founder of a blog and YouTube channel named Old School Lane. I've been doing it since December of 2011. And we started off doing blogs on our website. We did the Nickelodeon tribute back in June of 2012, where we looked back on every single Nickelodeon show that ever came out. And I watched everything from Pinwheel, America Goes Bananas, to I think I reached up to the point of 2007 or 8 where I was just kind of like burned out. I just want to, take a break and focus on some other stuff. I started posting some stuff on YouTube like around 2013. That's when I started posting up my podcast, which is called Casual Chats, where we talk about various topics from movies, TV shows, video games, a whole bunch of things. And we also interview a whole bunch of guests on the shows. We've interviewed people such as voice actors, writers, authors, show creators. I've interviewed close to 100 people. Everybody from, voice actors such as Candy Milo and Kira Buckland, and even some of the voice actors from As Told by Ginger when I was doing We're in Between with Casey and Ashley. I Yeah, I've even interviewed people who were writing books, such as Matthew Klickstein, who wrote the book "Sick Little Monkey," no, "Slimed: An Oral History of Nickelodeon's Golden Age." Thad Komorowski wrote "Sick Little Monkeys: An Unauthorized Ren and Stimpy Story." Cassine Gaines, who wrote Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse, A Christmas Story, behind the scenes of a holiday classic, We Don't Need Rose, The Making of Back to the Future, and the Search for the Crystal Skull. I mean, no, what was it? Search for the Crystal Skull. Yeah, Search for the Crystal Skull. And then there was also other show creators. I've interviewed Craig Bartlett, the creator of Hey Arnold. I've interviewed him twice.
Nice.
Yeah, it was quite an achievement, that's for sure. I've interviewed Mitchell Kriegman, the creator of Angry Beavers. No, wait, Clarissa Explains It All. Mitch Shower created Angry Beavers, sorry. And, I've interviewed like so many other people over the years. Just recently on the show, I interviewed back in last December was Kathy Westluck and Andrew Francis, very well-known Canadian voice actors who you may know for doing stuff such as My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, or a whole bunch of other shows. But I had them over to discuss about Cyber Six in honor of its 20th anniversary. But yeah, I've done a whole bunch of other things. I've done analysis videos discussing about various shows. I did probably the ones that you probably know me for, if you look online, is the history of Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie, what makes This Told by Ginger a groundbreaking yet overlooked Nicktoon, is Disney's Doug really that bad, and a few others. So. And in addition to the other podcasts that I do besides Casual Chats and We're in Between, which we completed a few years ago, I'm also known for doing Pixmix, which is looking back on every single Pixar film, Dream Machine, looking back on every single DreamWorks film, the Roald Dahl retrospective, looking at every single movie or TV movie adaptation based off of the author Roald Dahl. And I'm also the co-host of the Aaron Meta Show and Live and Wired with Decker Shadow and that long-haired creepy guy. So I do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, quite. And I'm like listening to some of those names that you've interviewed. I'm like just in awe. Like, how did you get the creator of Hey Arnold?
Well, that is a very long story. So
how'd you manage that one?
Okay. Well, it all started back around 2012 when I was just starting the Nickelodeon tribute on my blog. I was originally supposed to get him for a blog interview because that's what I was doing at the time. I was going to be covering Hey Arnold, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I, talk to Craig Bartlett about, doing Hey Arnold stuff. And I had gotten a hold of Justin Shankaro, the voice of Harold Berman, Ben Diskin, who was the second voice of Eugene, and Andy McAfee, who is the voice of Phoebe. I gotten a hold of them, but I didn't get a hold of Craig. So I thought, okay, well, those three are great. I'll just use them instead, and maybe Craig, I'll get him some other time. But then I started focusing more on podcasts, and then about a year and a half after I wrote my message, and Craig was like, oh yeah, sure, when do you want to meet? And so that was when my co-host and the co-founder of Old School Lane, Kevin Guglielmo, and that's when we interviewed him, and we talked about Hey Arnold, and we talked about back then when we were wondering about like, when's any news about the Jungle Movie, when is that coming out? And he's like, I don't know, I'm currently working on PBS with Dinosaur Train and Ready Jet Go. And so then there was talks about the Skyrat pilot that Craig Bartlett was going to be working on, but that was scrapped in favor of the Jungle Movie because of fan demand. They wanted it so badly, and you can check out my video on the history of the Jungle Movie for more details. And then about I would say almost 2 years ago, when the Hey Arnold Complete Collection was released, I had Craig on again, and I helped talk about the upcoming collection, and that was when the Jungle Movie came out, so I discussed to him about that. And yeah, it was just a matter of like, being respectable with writing to people that you grew up with. Like, they have websites that you can be able to like put down contact information, like their agent's email or their manager's email, or even their own personal email. Sometimes they don't respond back to you, sometimes they decline, and sometimes they would be like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'd love to, when can we do it? And that's when we set up the time and I get my questions ready, and then I basically just record and post it up there. More recently, in addition for me looking up the people, I have somebody named Liam Higgins who helps me get a hold of some people for the show. For example, he's gotten a hold of at least 2 people for me. I need to edit those and post it up, but he's also been a help, and he does great service for those who are interested in that. And so, yeah, that's how I get a hold of some of the people that I've had on the show.
I mean, if he came back for another interview, that means you were really good. Like he must really like you.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, if that would be the case, I mean, if that that would be, yeah, absolutely, that would be amazing. There are a few people that I've gotten a hold of like 2 or 3 times, like Jim Jenkins, the creator of Doug. I've interviewed him twice. Paul Germain, I've had him on my podcast at least 3 separate times. And even for the people from We're in Between, I've had some of them twice or even 3 times on the show for different reasons. So yeah, it's all about being respectable. It's all about knowing that these are regular people. I mean, I know that they did something that you as a child were like, oh man, they meant a lot to me, and they did this thing that I grew up with, and it's amazing, and they're above me. It's like, no, they're not. They're just regular people, and this is what they do for their work. It's, you just treat them normally. I mean, you can be nervous, absolutely. For example, when I first started doing this, my first interview was with Mark Summers, the host of Double Dare, and I was nervous, like really, really nervous. But then as time went on, when I started speaking to him, and then he told this really good story about like when he was 15 years old, he got a hold of his idol, well, the person that he looked up to the most, Johnny Carson. For those who don't know, Johnny Carson was a late night talk show host. I mean, he pretty much like kickstarted the careers of like David Letterman and Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien and all those people. He was the originator. So he got his tape recorder and he was like stumbling and he was asking his questions, and then it taught him a very valuable lesson about like, if you are appearing nervous, then the people who you're interviewing are gonna like not take you as seriously. So you want to be able to just calm yourself down, keep yourself well composed, and then just speak to them if they were just talking to anybody else. And as long as you keep a respectable and professional persona, then they will treat you the same way. And who knows, maybe you will get offered a second or third time to be a guest on your show, or even something else. Who knows?
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of Old School Lane and your podcasting, so where did you get the idea to even start that from the beginning?
Well, it was 2011. It was the Great Recession. Nobody had work, and Kevin and I were just like really depressed, and we didn't know what to do with ourselves. So we were like, hey, you just want to do something together? And he was like, yeah, sure. And that's when we started doing our blogs. That's when we started doing casual chats where we just, talked about various topics. Nowadays, he's not doing it as much anymore because, he's married now, and, he's a lot more stable. But I decided that I wanted to continue on because I had a good time with it. And, about a month after we, started Old School Lane, we became associated with a website known as Manic Expression. And we know a lot of friends and colleagues who are from there, and we invite them on the show to talk about various things. So, yeah, I mean, we've been, doing this for almost 9 years now. So it's amazing how far we've come since then.
Definitely. And when you kind of came up with the idea, was what was part of it? Because when I started my podcast, my kind of thing was, is there anything out there that is similar? Because when I was kind of thinking of ideas of even doing a podcast, it was always a case of I kind of wanted to do something that was gonna stand out from the rest. And was that something that you thought about when once you started Old School Lane and then moving on to like different various topics like Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie, and As Told by Ginger, and many
The
other.
reason why I did it was because I just wanted to talk about something that I personally enjoy. I remember when I first started doing the Nickelodeon tribute back in 2012. I was actually curious about like looking up. Is like, did anybody else do this? And not really. They never looked back on every single show. So I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun if I looked back on every single show and see, how well it holds up? And yeah, so starting back around, January of 2011, that's when I started, looking at every single, show that was available on either YouTube or Vimeo or any of those places. And back then, there was like they were non-existent. Like trying to look for Pinwheel, for example, was like incredibly hard. Like there was like maybe like 2 or 3 clips of Pinwheel scattered around, but nowadays you can get like 6-hour marathons of Pinwheel. It's amazing. Yeah, we just had to deal with like the limitations of what we had back then. So, like certain shows weren't even out on DVD, or, like they were like region locked or something like that. But now they're a lot more available. Like even shows that we never thought would even come back have been brought out. Like when we were doing Danger Mouse, Count Duckula, and the Mysterious Cities of Gold. Like we didn't know that a few years later there would be like reboots of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because we did an episode on Danger Mouse as well, and they were all pretty much on YouTube, so they were quite easily accessible in that respect for us.
Yeah, like back then, I couldn't find it. Like it was really hard. I guess maybe I don't know if it was an American thing that we didn't have a lot of it like on YouTube or something, but yeah, like I tried looking for like classic episodes and there were some that I did find, but then there were others that were difficult. Other ones that were like really difficult to find, like try looking for like Alex Mack or Shelby Woo or anything like that. Now they've all been released on DVD, which makes it a lot easier. So I was essentially like doing something that I enjoyed. Like Old School Lane has always been about like, people gathering together and just talking about things that we enjoy talking about, and hopefully people would even enjoy listening. And that was even if they were even remotely there. Like, when we were starting out, there was like pretty much little to no views, and we were just doing it just for our enjoyment. And then a few years later, thanks to various things such as signing up for Channel Frederator, and even some of the people that I've interviewed, and even you know for an extent, like people such as like Toonrific Tariq and Saber Spark and all those people that I've had on the show, or that I've kind of helped out in some way. They would say about like, oh, check out Old School Lane, and check out this stuff, and that kind of helped me out a little bit. So yeah, it's it basically, for those who are just starting out and you're afraid that, oh, you're never going to go far or anything like that, I just want to give an advice that you just keep on going. You go consistently, and someday you will find your audience.
You know what? It's crazy because two things. One is that I wish I met you this time last year, because it was literally this time last year when I was drawing up the plans for starting a podcast. And secondly, I think that in terms of content, I think there's a lot of similarities in what you and I do. And I'm just thinking like, this is awesome. Like I'm listening to you, and they are saying that you've done shows like Count Duckula, Danger Mouse, as a show that we've done, obviously As Told by Ginger, which was like the episode a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just thinking, oh, this is awesome. There is someone out there who's got a similar-ish podcast, and it's kind of still going strong to this day. So it kind of gives me
not knock on wood.
yeah, and it gives me like the whole hope that I can carry on doing this. And I've kind of learned, especially recently, that there is an audience, and especially if someone is noticing it and they're saying, oh, I listened to this and I thought it was great. It could just be one person, it can be 2 people, 4 or 5 people. If I'm getting through to like one person, then I kind of know that it's working. And now that I'm hearing that there is someone out there, who's got a podcast that kind of deals with similar topics, it kind of makes me happy because it kind of tells me that, you know what, you can carry on doing this, and it's limitless, isn't it? There isn't, like, cartoons ain't gonna run out for me.
Exactly, yeah.
It's
And
never.
yeah, exactly. And nowadays I think it's very it's very amazing that you're able to do this because with people staying at home because of the COVID-19, they're demanding that they want to see or hear more stuff so that they can be able to pass the time, whether they're at home or whether they're working. I got a comment the other day from someone who said, thank you so much for posting up your stuff. Can you please continue doing it? Because, it makes listening to your podcasts, a better experience while I'm out working, and time goes quicker. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what we're doing right now, especially for those who are in desperate need for something to do, whether they're, out and about or whether they're at home and they were like, oh, what am I supposed to do? It's like, we try our very best to entertain with stuff that we like, and we just have fun with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of you and growing up, talk to me about that. What cartoons, TV shows were you watching? What's your favorites?
That's really hard to say because I was born in 86, so I grew up with a lot of varied shows. Like when I think like as far as back as I could remember, like some of the earliest memories that I have is like watching, episodes of Double Dare. You Can't Do That on Television. Eureka's Castle, The Wonderful World of David the Gnome. And then like when there was even like stuff on the Disney Channel when they were starting to like become really popular. There was like the Disney Afternoon started with like Gummy Bears and DuckTales and Tailspin and Darkwing Duck and Gargoyles and all that stuff. And then that was when Cartoon Network started. And then I started watching like Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and I watched a lot of the Hanna-Barbera reruns. And stuff on PBS. There was like either Sesame Street or Mister Rogers or Carmen Sandiego, and then even with like Fox or like those stuff like the Spider-Mans or the X-Men or Batman the Animated Series. There's I mean, those are like some of the shows that I remember. And then obviously with like Nickelodeon, like you have the obvious, you have Doug, you have Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, and then like the live action stuff like such as Clarissa and Pete and Pete and all that, Salute Your Shorts, all that, all those shows. So I would say that those were like my earliest memories. And then when I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old, that was when Sailor Moon came out, and I was like just infatuated with it. I only saw the first season because that's when I moved away. And then around the same time, in like a year later in 96, my cousin brought over his PlayStation and played Resident Evil, and that was when he introduced me to Dragon Ball Z. And that was when around my middle and high school years, I was just obsessed with anime. And yeah, there's I mean, I just like there's so many things that I just like. It's hard to like contemplate.
Do you know what, I can so relate with that, because obviously, yeah, you and I, we kind of doing like a podcast or shows about old school cartoons, and you might think that you and I might have like a set like top shows that we watch, and we can kind of rank them from our favorites to our, I don't know, not least favorite. But I don't think I can either. So if someone asked me, oh, hey, what was your favorites growing up? I would just be listing tons and tons of stuff, chucking shows at you. Be like, yeah, you've told me about 20 shows, but which one is your favorite? It's like all 20 of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like, what's your favorite child?
I know, but it's like I can't pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna talk about all of them and kind of put them all there. And if you remember it in terms of my podcast, if you remember it, then great. And if you didn't, like, I've got loads of younger cousins who will be on my podcast, and they'll text me going, I've never heard of these shows in my life. So when we did Sailor Moon, so many people got back to me and were like, what's Sailor Moon? I've never heard of it in my life.
Well, which version did you watch? I'm curious.
I watched the old version.
Oh my god. Wait, hold on. Which dub?
Oh, Japanese.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I thought you were like, which version? I was like, we saw the Deke dub, and I'm like, oh god, I feel
Yeah,
so sorry for
it
you if
just
you did.
had I mean, because it had English subtitles, but
Okay,
I'm
okay,
pretty sure it was
you're
the.
fine. You're fine then because here's the thing. Like when I first saw Sailor Moon, I saw the Deke dub, and like oh boy, the Deke dub. I mean, I know a lot of people that grew up with it, and they know,
Yeah.
they know Usagi as Serena, and they know Mamoru as Darien, and they think that
No,
Zoisite is a girl, and that Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune were cousins. It's like, oh no, 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 that is not the case.
because yeah, like I'm not gonna lie, like I'm not like the biggest anime fan in the world, and when I was starting the podcast and I was telling like friends, family, oh hey, I'm doing a podcast. What do you lot reckon about old school cartoons? And I remember, I think one of my friends she's French, she was like, oh, you definitely have to talk about Sailor Moon, and I was like, what Sailor Moon? I've never heard of it in my life. She's like, what? She's
I
like,
mean, yeah, I can
like
understand.
she's like, if you're gonna do a cartoon podcast and you don't know Sailor Moon, then you need to get to know Sailor Moon. And I just remember, and obviously when I'm looking for links to watch it, there was an option to watch like an English dubbed version,
Yeah,
and what
most
have
likely
you.
you
And it was
probably
like
went over to the Viz Media website, right?
I think so, something like that.
Yeah,
But
because they have the access to watching every single episode of Sailor Moon either in English or in Japanese.
wow, I think it was that, or it was another website. But I just went, you
Maybe it
know
was
what?
Crunchyroll.
Might have been, yeah. And because I just thought I had to, in order to like really do the show justice, I have to watch the Japanese version and just have at most English subtitles.
Yeah, that's a great way to watch it, especially if you want to listen to Kotaro Mitsurushi's portrayal of Usagi slash Sailor Moon. But the newer dub that they have, the Viz dub, which they did about almost 10 years ago, if you can believe it, it is a much more accurate dub than the Deke dub that we had back in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, like either the Viz dub or the Japanese version is the best way to watch the classic Sailor Moon. But yeah, I'm actually curious about if your friend seen Sailor Moon Crystal and what are her thoughts on it.
I would imagine that she did. Oh, Sailor Moon Crystal, that's the new version, isn't it? Because you know what, like initially, right, I started to watch Sailor Moon Crystal, and I'm watching it thinking the quality is amazing. I'm like, were they this advanced, like 1080p, like videos and
No, no.
everything, and even like with the theme song and everything? I'm watching it, and I'm like, okay, hang on a second. And then I kind of look back on it, and even like the theme song was like a song,
Hmm.
like it was like a Japanese like girl group or something.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah, it was a
looking at it,
Japanese
and that
girl
was
group.
when I thought, okay, something's not adding up here, because I'm like, this song came out in like 2011, and I'm supposed to be watching the show that came out in 1992. I think it was when Sailor Moon first dropped in Japan, and that was when I kind of went back, and then I saw a completely different theme song and a completely different sort of like graphics and layout and pictures and what have you. And I thought, oh, okay, this is the Sailor Moon I need to be watching. And the Sailor Moon Crystal is a completely not separate, but kind of like it's
It's the
yeah.
same story, but the only difference is that Sailor Moon Crystal is sticking close to the Japanese manga. Kind of like how Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood or Dragon Ball Z Kai was, in which you have to understand that I don't think we have this problem anymore, but back then, when it came to like creating a show or based off of a popular manga, they would like be pumping out stories every single week, and it would be at a point in which like, oh man, the manga chapter and the episode of the anime are like they're going on at the same time. So Sailor Moon would do a lot of filler episodes. They would be having episodes that have nothing to do with the manga, or filler arcs in which like they would have like 12 to 13 episodes that have absolutely nothing to do with it, so that the creator of the manga would be able to catch up with everything. So Sailor Moon Crystal is essentially that it is the complete and uncut story from the manga, and that there's no filler episodes, there's no episodes that derive from any other sources other than where the source material is. So it's a lot shorter because there's practically no filler. And the animation style is different because in the first two seasons they aired Sailor Moon Crystal on Nico Nico, which is the Japanese equivalent of YouTube. It was essentially like a web series. It's like, for the kids to watch on YouTube. And then season three, they moved it to television where they had a bigger budget. And then they got better story writers to kind of like connect everything closer to the manga. And as of right now, we're waiting for the Sailor Moon Crystal movie to come out, which is focusing on the fourth season, which is going to be about the Dead Moon Circus and Chibiusa meeting up with Pegasus. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing it.
I tell you what, right, with Sailor Moon, it struck a chord with me instantly. I really liked it. For a show that I'd never even heard of, never mind seen, like doing it for the pod, like there have been times where we've done sort of cartoons and they haven't necessarily been great.
Sure.
But like with Sailor Moon, it was nothing could be further. Like I've actually gone back and I'm starting to watch it again because it's like this is all really, really good. The storylines are compelling. I like the fight scenes. I like Sailor Moon as a character. I like all the other girls as well. So like Neptune, Venus, Uranus. I like the two little cats, Artemis and Luna. Like everything about it. Because like in terms of anime, the only thing that I could have probably have told you was Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, and My Hero Academia.
Yeah,
that's about it.
Okay.
And all three of them were pretty good, and I pretty much like them.
Sure.
But obviously, to an anime expert, they'd be like, "Yeah, that's probably it." It barely scratches the surface.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, Sailor Moon, even though that it wasn't the first magical show anime, like, with girls becoming superheroes with magical powers, it definitely was the one that kind of like kickstarted it. Like a lot of people would be influenced by it. There was like Card Captor Sakura would come out, and then, various others. Dragon Ball Z was like the cornerstone of so many shonen anime that, would be coming out over the past 15 years. Like people such as Eiichiro Oda or Masashi Kishimoto, the creators of One Piece and Naruto, would be influenced by.
I know that. I know One Piece.
I mean, it is like the biggest anime property ever. Like it is the most popular anime in Japan. So. Yeah, I mean, they were influenced by Akira Toriyama, who created Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. And then they did their own shows. And then, eventually, the people who watched those shows were influenced by One Piece and Naruto, like the guy who created My Hero Academia. He was a huge Naruto fan as a kid. And then, he started doing My Hero Academia. So it just kind of comes full circle about like, influences upon influences. And, with As Told by Ginger, going back into that topic again, Emily Kapnick was heavily influenced from her childhood, and she watched a movie back in the late 90s that was called Welcome to the Dollhouse, which was essentially like, a girl who was going through like the struggles of being a teenager surrounded by people and all that kind of stuff. And she wanted to put in those major influences into the show. The music was also a major key as well, from like Alanis Morissette and Garbage and various others. And also, everybody who worked on the show had put in their little influences of their childhood, like Eric Casimiro, who was one of the main co-producers of As Told by Ginger. I mean, he essentially like put in his childhood in there, like, moments from his experiences, like Gym Class Confidential, where Hoodsie was afraid to get himself naked and take a shower. That was basically based off of Eric's life and experiences. Hoodsie was based off of a childhood friend, and Carl was essentially himself. And Lois was based off of Emily's mother, and the whole divorce thing was based off of her life, in which she and her sister would be going back and forth between their mom and their dad. If you want to see the father's perspective, Emily Kapnick also created a show called Suburgatory, which is a great show, by the way. Kind of, I mean, she calls it the spiritual successor to As Told by Ginger if it was live action. So yeah, it's actually interesting about how influences can, come and go so far.
Do you know what's crazy? Because
Yeah.
Paul, when we were talking about As Told by Ginger, he literally spoke about the gym class confidential
Oh,
episode,
really?
and it was something that we could like relate to at school in this country in particular. Because I remember like when we used to do PE or gym class for you guys, we call it PE here, so physical education. And like when we used to like do swimming, like we would never have a shower at all. Like, and if we did, we'd still be like in trunks and whatnot. And it wasn't, and even like when you're getting changed and whatnot, you'd either go to the toilets and get changed, or you just like put a towel over and over or under what have you. And it wasn't something that you just would get changed in front of everybody. Like that wasn't something that we did in our school, and it was something that resonated with us when we were talking about that episode in particular. So I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because it just kind of brought me back to that
Mhm.
particular sort of memory at school.
Yeah, like there's a lot of moments from As Told by Ginger that were based off of real life experiences. Like, for example, Come Back Little Seal Girl, if you remember that episode, the side plot where Carl wants to touch Mrs. Gordon, his teacher's mummified hand. And he wants to be able to see if it's cursed. Well, one of the co-producers of As Told by Ginger, Kay Boutelier, her teacher had a mummified hand that they would bring to school like every year, but it was said that she wasn't able to see it because she went on a family trip. So she just remembered her teacher mentioning that she was going to bring a mummified hand, and other things such as like with Hello Stranger, for example, again, going into the story where Emily Kapnick, she went through, her parents getting a divorce. And so she talked about her experiences of like, um, with how she felt with her father not being around or her mother not being around, depending on what the situation was. So that self isolation of not having like your whole family together. So yeah, there's like, yeah, and of course there are some things from As Told by Ginger that I know the influences or the inspiration behind it, but I actually can't tell people about it because it's kind of confidential. But I know the story behind the one episode, Stuff Will Kill You, where Ginger gets addicted to caffeine. I know the story about that, but again, I really can't say it because it's confidential. But yeah, like all those things, like with the stuff that happened in Ginger, and even with like Rugrats, for example, like when it was just starting out, a lot of the people who were working on the show were just becoming parents themselves, and they were just implementing the idea about like what would happen if our children were talking, like what would they say, what would they be thinking of. So that was essentially that, and they were just making fun of like a whole bunch of things that were going on at the time, like the strong female empowerment, and Dr. Lipschitz was essentially Dr. Spock, and everybody was just following him to the T without even thinking about their own intuition of being a parent or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I just think that it's just so interesting when looking back on a show and it's like, oh, this is based off of this person's childhood, or this is based off of an experience that they had, or somewhere they grew up in. It's like I grew up in a similar place like that. So yeah, it's really interesting to talk about.
Yeah, and in terms of As Told by Ginger, there was something I think you said in the interview with Vice, and it was something about like how people should be themselves growing up in school. And that was another sort of topic within As Told by Ginger that we spoke about on our podcast, was that when you're growing up, or in my case, in my school, you couldn't really be yourself or kind of be a certain kind of way that you're comfortable in. You had to conform to whatever the fashion or whatever the culture was in your school. Otherwise, you'd suffer greatly. And it's only when you grow up and you realize, damn, like you can be yourself, but you don't kind of see that growing up. And that was something that you'd said that really, again, struck a chord with Paul and I, because we were like, yeah, that's so true. Like you can, like, really and truly, you can be yourself when you're at school, and in the long run that would serve you so much better than trying to be someone that you're not. But at the time, as an 11-year-old kid, you're just thinking, or in my case was, right, just let me get through school so that no one will notice me, and I don't know, get beat up in PE or something like that. That's the mentality that you're thinking. You're not thinking, oh, be yourself, because that's what your parents will tell you, won't they? Because they'll be
Yeah,
like,
pretty much. Yeah, and that context was for the episode "Come Back, Little Seal Girl" because the journalist was asking me about like what are your favorite episodes and why, and one of them was "Come Back, Little Seal Girl," and that was the episode in which when there's a talent show coming up and Macy wants to do the Little Seal Girl, which is based off of a cartoon or a movie or something that they grew up with, and it was like considered childish. And when they were showcasing it to like the popular kids like Courtney and Miranda, they were like confused. They thought it was childish. And so Ginger and Dodie don't want to do it, but Macy is all up for it. She's like, I'm going to dress up in this seal costume and I'm going to sing the little seal girl. And Ginger and Dodie are like, no, you shouldn't, because we want to do middle school things. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to conform to, people, what they say. And then we have obviously the most amazing scene in which when Macy is singing on stage, when the tape, yeah, remember what a tape is, when it when the cassettes, all the tape just gets destroyed and now she has to sing the song on her own. It's kind of sad because I was interviewed by a podcast many years ago about like they saw that scene as a clip on YouTube and they thought it was really dorky, and it's like, oh, of course it looks dorky if you remove the context. You have to understand. I mean, it's essentially a very powerful moment where a person is confronting a fear that she's being surrounded by a whole bunch of people that think that she looks absolutely ridiculous. She's walking around in a seal costume, and she's like doing this interpretive dance at first, but then when the tape runs out, gets ruined, then she sings it, and then she just like pours her heart and soul into the performance, and then she wins at the end. So yeah, it just goes to show you about like, conquering your fears, just being yourself, and things will turn out well for you in the end.
yeah, because I think I'm 2 years younger than you, so 1988 was when I was born, and I reckon, like, in terms of, maybe it was, obviously it's different because we're from two different countries, but like in terms of like growing up, and I would imagine like school and like the way kids were kind of similar in the sense of
Yeah, I mean, kids can be awful, like really awful.
nowadays, and you've got like the whole social media, because like what I'm trying to say is that we never had social media growing up, right? Like we never had Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok. Don't even ask me about TikTok. I don't even know what
I
that's
mean, the only
about,
thing, the only
really.
equivalent that we had was like AOL Messenger.
Yeah, MSN Messenger for us. But then even then, that came when I was like sort of advanced into high school. But it wasn't like a case of we had that when we were like
Like
early
7 or 8
high
years
school.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like it was kind of straightforward in the sense of if there was good things, bad things, whatnot, it will kind of be dealt with in the playground or at the school, and you can kind of get on with it. Whereas now it's like you got the kids and you got the social media, and you try and tell a 12-year-old kid now, hey, be yourself, man. It's gonna work out. But if someone's gonna do like a performance of like dressing up as a seal and doing all of that stuff, then I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that's
yeah. There was an episode that called TGIF, not to be confused with the ABC Friday night lineup of the same name, where Ginger and Carl are going through different experiences of Friday the 13th. And it ends up with their house being covered in mold, and they're being told to evacuate so they can be able to fumigate. And there's like all of these news reporters who are coming up to them, and they're talking to them about like what is it like living in filth and all that kind of stuff. And I even mentioned this in the We're in Between podcast where we were talking about that episode. It's like, oh man, it's got to be so embarrassing for Ginger, because Carl and Lois, Ginger's and Carl's mom, they're like perfectly fine with it. They're like talking about everything. It's like, oh, Carl says like, oh, I want to be able to collect a mold so I can add it to my collection. And Lois is like, oh, nothing out of the ordinary was out of place for the house, except that, Carl's underwear was on the couch or something. And Ginger is like completely embarrassed. She is at that point in the episode where she's like, I'm embarrassed with my family. Why can't my family be like Courtney's? Because they're so nice and polite and all that kind of stuff. So I was saying in that episode, like, oh man, what would it be like if social media was around back then? Like her friends would like tear her to shreds, saying like, oh, look at this. Look at her, being kicked out of her house because it's dirty. Like she would have suffered greatly.
Definitely. And I'm going to ask you a tough question. If you could give me your top 5 as told by Ginger episodes.
Oh, that's not a tough one at all, because I did that list 5 years ago.
Oh, okay, great. So yeah, I was going to say, like, in terms of listeners, because like I think I'm beyond that point. Like I definitely told listeners, go out of your way and watch As Told by Ginger. It is a brilliant cartoon.
Yeah. But here's the thing, like, this is not one of those cartoons that you can just like watch any episode in random order. You can't do that. I mean, nowadays, people are like, of course you can't do that. It's like, if you want to know the story of Adventure Time or Steven Universe or BoJack Horseman, where, there's a continuing story arc. It's like, essentially do that for As Told by Ginger, even though that show came out 20 years before any of those other ones did. I mean, for, Adventure Time and Steven Universe, like over, a decade ago, but you know what I'm saying. But I will be more than happy to give you my top 15 As Told by Ginger's episodes, no problem. So my number 5 is, let's see if I can remember. Let's see. Oh yeah, now I remember. Yes. So my number 5 is obviously it's Comeback Little Seal Girl. Actually, I was just talking about that. I know, right? It's like, oh, what's my number 5? It's like, oh yeah, that one show that I just went on and on about. Like, oops. Okay, so you already know about my thoughts of that. So moving on. Okay, number 4 is actually the last episode of the series, which is called The Wedding Frame.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
I know that episode, yeah.
You know that episode, so you're not worried about me spoiling it.
No.
Okay, well, I mean, like for our listeners, if you haven't seen the show, spoiler warning. Okay, so The Wedding Frame is about Lois and Dr. Day finally getting married, and Ginger is helping her mom plan for the wedding and all that kind of stuff. Carl and Hoodsey are in the middle of doing an investigation because they think that Dr. Dave is cheating on their mom with somebody else. Dr. Dave's mother wants to break up Lois and Dr. Dave because she doesn't like Lois, and so she hires this person named Nikki Laporte to do it, which, by the way, I mean, it's kind of shocking to think that there was a transvestite character in As Told by Ginger, story, because that's who Nikki Laporte is. I mean, we find out at the end, at the end of the end of the movie, it's not Nikki Laporte, it's Nicholas Laporte. So it was essentially like a man dressed up in drag.
Plot twist.
Yeah, plot twist. So yeah, there, and also there's a whole bunch of stories that are tangled in, such as Darren and Simone, and Darren having feelings for Ginger again, and Ginger contemplating on whether she should be with Orion or Darren, and then it finally leads. Yes.
No. Because I'll tell you like in a bit about what I think of Ginger and Darren, but like, what's he playing at?
Okay. Now I know that you guys did actually see A Lesson in Tightropes, but did you guys see the other episodes that were leading up to it, like Heat Lightning and the detention and all the other episodes that were kind of leading up to it?
Yeah, because I know that. Yeah, like I said, I know it was something that was building up, and it was something that came to a head, which is how he intimated it. Like, look, this is it's been a
It's
long
been really
time
rough,
coming.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, they were essentially going their separate ways. Like, starting off with Heat Lightning, where Ginger was going back to, Camp Caprice. Instead of being like a camper, she was actually there as being a camp counselor. So she was going over there and thinking that, oh, if I stay away from Darren for a while, maybe, I'll start missing him. And that's when she reunites with Sasha again, her ex that we first got introduced to in the first time that she went to Camp Caprice. And then there was other episodes that were kind of like leading up, like the episode in which when they went over to the county fair and Darren is not having a good time because he's not enjoying any of the activities that they're doing. Then detention, in which when Darren is going to be playing his first football game, and then Ginger gets detention, and Ginger is like slowly not even remotely interested in football. She wants to do her music or her poetry and all that kind of stuff. And then the episode that came out before A Lesson in Tightropes, where it focuses on Dodie, and she starts learning that, hey, these two are starting to hook up. And then she writes the letter to Darren saying, you need to make a decision on who you are going to be with. Are you going to be with Ginger, or are you going to be with Simone? And then that next episode, he ended up with Simone because it was much easier. And so then we didn't see them again until like a few episodes later, where they were constantly at each other's throats, where, it's called Battle of the Bands, if you don't know. They were, it's basically that the band fundings and money were being taken away so that the football team can get new stain-proof uniforms. And Ginger is helping Macy out because she wants to not only save the band, but she also wants to get revenge at Darren. And then it becomes more of getting revenge at Darren. And, they're starting to get into each other's throats and stuff like that. And then they start kind of like having a little bit of an agreement with each other. And then finally, we get up to that final episode where Darren and Ginger, they think about like, oh man, do I love you? I mean, I'm starting to miss you now, especially when, the Foutleys are going to be moving over to a new house. Because, now that Dr. Dave is, he's a doctor and they actually have money, they can live in the same neighborhood where Courtney lives. And then Courtney loses all her money.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the family loses all their money because of bad investments from the father. And he gets arrested, and then they end up living in the same house that Ginger was living in.
Oh, wow. Because, I love Blake. He was my favorite.
Yeah.
He's my absolute favorite. So I don't want him to have bad fortunes. So that kind of makes me upset a little bit because
everybody was upset with it, to be quite honest. It's like, oh no, why are Blake and Courtney suffering? Why? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are still upset about that.
Blake was my guy, man. He was my guy. Definitely, I loved him. He was great.
Yeah. And then it leads up to the wedding, and there's all these like, plot twists and reveals and all that kind of stuff. And then finally we get to the last scene of the movie where Ginger's an adult and she's reading off her book, and it shows off what everybody's up to. Like Carlin Hoodsey are journalists, and we have Darren and Ginger getting married, and they have a kid together.
No!
And yeah, it's true.
Oh.
And then Dodie marries Chet Zipper, and they have a kid together. And then, Ginger's reading off her book, which is called As Told by Ginger, which is a series of stories, which is that is the reason why the show is called As Told by Ginger, because throughout this entire time, Ginger was reading stories about herself in that book, in that bookstore. Yeah.
Oh, my mind is blown.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm serious. Anyway, so continuing on. So my number 3, you actually did discuss about this episode with Paul, and She Was Gone, the episode where Ginger writes a poem and they think that she has suicidal depression.
I love that episode. That was a cracking episode, that was.
Yeah, it's a great episode, yeah. Yeah, and then that's when Carl meets up with Noelle and they start having a thing together. So yeah, that episode is fantastic. It was nominated for an Emmy, but it lost to The Simpsons. So yeah, that's a great episode. Number 2 is Hello Stranger. No, wait, what no, was it the episode that, yeah, I think it was the episode that lost to the Simpsons. Yeah. Okay, so number 2 is Hello Stranger, and that was the episode I talked about briefly about, like, Ginger wanting to connect with her father again, and so she invites him over to a poem reading, and she reads her poem in front of the whole school, and she's hoping that he'll be there, but he doesn't show up, and then Lois ends up in the hospital because she accidentally drinks Carl's dehydrated sea snake, think it was lemonade, and then Carl got bitten by a monkey, and so he acts like a monkey. And they both end up in the hospital, and Ginger, is hoping that her father shows up, and Lois orders flowers over the phone and writes that it's from her dad, but she knew that it was from her mom the entire time. And then my number 1 favorite episode is actually the third TV movie, which is called Butterflies or Free, or No Turning Back, as some countries call it. But it's essentially the episode where everybody graduates. Ginger graduates from middle school and goes into high school, and Carl graduates from elementary school and goes into middle school. The reason why it's my favorite is because I went through a similar experience. I saw this episode right around the time in which I was graduating from high school and going over to college. And there's a lot of great things on that episode, like Ginger being afraid of moving on and changing and growing, and Carl, his teacher gives an assignment about, like, putting something in a time capsule, and he puts in his petrified eyeball because he's kind of been pressured into, like, growing up and being mature, and Lois is preparing to lose weight for the wedding, and all these things are happening. And also, if you actually watch the TV movie, there's an appearance of a girl named Leandra. She appears just quickly. She was actually there because she contacted the Make-A-Wish Foundation because she was going through a severe case of leukemia at the time. And one of her requests was that she appears in an episode of As Told by Ginger, and she does appear there as a character.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and for Where in Between, we actually had her on the show, and we talked about, like, what was your experience like, and how did you do that? And she tells us the whole story about it. It was fantastic.
Nice. You know what? I think in terms of the episodes that you mentioned, I'm going to go back and watch them, especially the wedding frame one.
Well, I mean, like, I would suggest that you do watch the episodes that lead up to that, because then it will it would be much more stronger context, and you would appreciate it a lot more.
Definitely, but, like, hearing what happens, like, I'm intrigued. I'm like, I want to know. I want. Well, I know because you've said, but I want to see it for myself. And I think what I just remembered when I was talking about Blake was, I can't remember what the episode was, but I think he gets, like, one chest hair or something.
Yeah, that's.
I just remember how he was walking around with his
that's from Stuff Will Kill You. That's the episode where Ginger starts getting addicted to caffeine.
Oh,
and that's
man.
that's the episode where Carl is trying to prove himself that he's not a bad kid anymore, because in that episode, Butterflies Are Free, that we talked about, he wants to become more mature. And so he doesn't cause as much trouble anymore. But it's going to be hard for teachers to be convinced. It's like, oh, we know about your records. You've done all this bad stuff. We don't trust you. And then, it even goes too far, because the science teacher says that there's something incredibly deadly in his, refrigerator, and Carl sniffs it. And he's like, whoever did it, you have 48 hours to live. And Carl's like, oh no, I have to appreciate what I have now. So it's great.
It really is. But no, I just remembered now where he's just walking around with his, like, shirt out, and he's just showing off that chest hair, and he's like, look at me, I've got the chest hair, I'm a man, and walking around like that. Just made me laugh. I just thought that was brilliant. I mean, in terms of episodes for me that gets honorable mention, so, like, Wicked Game.
Oh, I hate that episode.
I really liked it, but obviously I liked it because it was, again, like, some of the themes and some of the stuff that they're dealing with.
Okay, like, the themes, yes, that is true, but the follow-up, the Easter ham, is a slap in the face because they never follow up on it.
Did they not? Because I know it ended on a cliffhanger where
exactly
one of them is calling...
the moment that the episode starts, they're friends again. And they have a brief mention of it, like, oh, don't forget, Ginger, Dodie did this thing to you. It's like, That's all they mention of it. It is a slap in the face because you're like, what
Oh,
happens next? But they
yeah.
never bring it up again.
Do they not?
No,
I'm surprised by that, to be honest,
I
because I
am
would have
too.
thought, because in terms of this show, as told by Ginger, I felt that they respected the viewers a lot in terms of the storylines that they were dealing with, the fact that it was a cartoon where people were wearing, like, for me,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
might
yeah,
it might not be like the biggest thing in the world, but like wearing different clothes for different episodes, for me, that's crazy to me.
yeah.
Like, because
Shout
it
out to
shows
Eric. Yeah,
personality.
yeah.
Yeah.
Shout outs to Eric Casemiro who came up with that idea.
All right, brilliant, brilliant. Like you're top man for doing that, and because
Yeah,
it's like it's personality. Because obviously, what you're wearing, it kind of expresses who you are, and obviously that's not something that I can relate with as a kid. Because as kids, we had school uniforms. Like
yeah, yeah.
we weren't
Sure.
allowed to wear what we want, so we couldn't really express personality except for expressing the logo on our school blazer, and that was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, like in that respect, I
Yeah,
loved it.
we actually mentioned that episode when we talked about it with the creator herself, Emily Kapnick. That was like the question that everybody wanted to know. It's like, why wasn't there a follow up? And then she was like saying, because sometimes people they get over things really quickly. It's like, oh, you're angry with a friend. Sometimes you just get over it and then you just move on. And I was like, okay, sure. I mean, I can understand some parts of it. It's like, oh, you said something mean and then you say I'm sorry and then you move on, but
Yeah,
that was going too far. But I mean,
yeah.
I
What
felt that
they
the
did,
execution should have been better.
yeah. Because in terms of that, it's treachery, it's betrayal. Like they are going out of their ways to like split Ginger and Darren up for
Yeah, yeah.
something really, really petty. Like,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Casey and I, we discussed about it in detail in our episode of Wicked Game on We're in Between. That, I mean,
yeah.
they're doing something really stupid and petty just because they're not getting any attention from Ginger because she's dating
Mm.
Darren. But yeah, unfortunately, they don't really follow up on that in in the next episode onwards. It's like it really pisses a lot of people off that they never did it.
No, and that's crazy. Because no, because I remember reading it, like in terms of like episode guides and what have you. And because I think Wicked Game was that also nominated for an award.
No, the episodes that were nominated for awards were Hello Stranger, there was And She Was Gone and Lunatic Lake.
Okay, no, because I'm no tell a lie. Because I remember reading As Told by Ginger, and they were saying that obviously themes deal with this, that, and whatnot, and they were like, for example, in Wicked Game, they deal with treachery, betrayal, and what have you. So
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
was where I
yeah.
kind of read that from, and I just remember reading that episode and thinking, right, I got to watch it because obviously it's been mentioned. And I remember reading the episode guide for the next episode, and I couldn't find anything where there was
That's because
anything to
there
follow
isn't.
up.
That's
Yeah,
because there isn't.
but I just kind of thought in the back of my mind, you know what? It's probably going to be in like the next couple of episodes down, and
Nope.
obviously part of my pod is that we're not going to watch every single episode, chapter and verse. It's going to be like an overview, but a good overview where we have a strong idea of what the show is about, what the characters are about, and we'll try and watch as much episodes that reflect our analysis. And yeah,
Sure.
it was something that they didn't really follow up on, which is
It's a
that's
real shame,
unfortunate.
honestly.
Yeah,
But I mean, I can understand where Emily was coming from in terms of like, oh, some people they just move on and they just forget about it. Which I mean, like that's her opinion, and she's the creator, so if she
yeah.
feels that way, good for her. But pretty much everybody else in the fandom was like, no, there should it
Mhm.
should have been done better. But anyway, but that's
100%.
beside the point. Yeah, continue with your honorable mentions.
Sorry, and No Hope for Courtney was another one that stuck out to me because obviously Kathleen Freeman,
Yes,
who plays who did the
Mrs.
voice for
Gordon.
Mrs. Gordon, and the ending of that really hit me because it was like obviously Carl was trying to make peace with her because he was like, I want you back. You're kind of
Yeah,
like I need you in my life because you're like I don't know.
the butter to
Like,
my biscuits.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. So it was in that sense, and it was like I remember even watching it where he's like to her, "Look, please come back," and she smiles. So I'm thinking, oh, she's going to come back. It's going to be great. It looks like they've patched things up. But then obviously I don't know Kathleen Freeman. I didn't
Well, I
know
mean, like,
like
here's the thing. Like, originally they were supposed to have that ending in which, like, Mrs. Gordon was going to come back and everything was going to go back to normal. But
yeah,
then she died of cancer, and then they had to change the ending.
yeah. So and I'm watching that ending where they're like when I think one of the teachers comes in, it's like, yeah, sadly Mrs. Gordon has passed away, and you can kind of hear the it just going like fading. You can hear the audio fading, and like Carl just looking absolutely devastated. And they're saying, "Oh, there's going to be a memorial service next week or at the weekend or something like that." So I'm watching that, and I'm like, "Oh no!" And then I think they do like in loving memory of Kathleen Freeman
Yeah, yeah, they do.
with the
Which is actually great because I'm glad that they were able to take a severe risk like that. Because if you remember, like during the time of shows like Rugrats and even Avatar: The Last Airbender, where they would have voice actors who passed away, like the guy who voiced Grandpa Lou, he passed away around 97, and so they got another person. The guy who played as Iroh, he passed away, like right towards, the end of season 2, and then he was replaced with another voice actor. But here, they did not get a voice actress to replace Mrs. Gordon. Once the character, was showcased and it was voiced by this person, and they, if the person died, then that was it. I mean, they never brought it. They never brought that character back. Same thing happened with another character, Mr. Celia, who was the science teacher who was shown up in the episode The A Ticket and Piece of My Heart. He died as well, and they didn't bring his character back, and then they replaced it with the science teacher who doesn't like Carl in the Stuff Will Kill You episode, because that would have been the teacher that Carl would have been with, had the actor who voiced him would have been alive.
yeah. But no, that was yeah, those were like the ones that I watched and I really really liked. And this was something that we were kind of talking about in terms of As Told by Ginger, because like for me anyway, like growing up, Rugrats was elite. It was like royalty in terms of like cartoons, and Klasky Suppose like sort of I think like it's up there as one of his best in my opinion. And we was kind of deliberating whether As Told by Ginger could be considered on that level. And talking to you now, like even when I was watching it, and I didn't watch a great deal of episodes. Maybe I watched like maybe 6 or 7 out of the whole series, and from that conclusion that I've drawn from, it's like it's definitely up there for me. I think As Told by Ginger is as elite as some of the other cartoons that I remember growing up that are like up
Yeah,
there.
out of the Klasky Chupo Nicktoons, it's my favorite. I think it's even better than Rugrats, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I'm the more I watch of this, the more I'm convinced of it. Because I think Rugrats will always have a special place in my heart. Because
Sure.
it came out when I was pretty much a kid myself, and it's one of those where you can kind of emotionally invest yourself in as a kid, and it's never that sort of infatuation has never really gone away. Whereas As Told by Ginger, I'm watching this now really for like the first time because obviously doing my pod, and I'm watching it and I'm like I loved everything about it. I loved the theme song. I loved the characters. I loved how it was done, the stories that they would tell. Like I said before, they respect viewers because they're telling you, look, if you're in the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, you're probably also going through these similar-ish sort of things. And like high school isn't this lovely trip of happiness and you're going to make all the friends in the world and you're going to be super popular and you're going to do this and that and whatnot. Whereas As Told by Ginger was like, yeah, these are ordinary people who just want to get through middle school and then high school and so on and so forth. And I really that's the thing that I really liked about that show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for a lot of people, when they saw it more recently, because I mean, I guess they're kind of like similar. I've heard your story so many times in which I didn't see the show when it first came out because it didn't appeal to me. SpongeBob was more my show, or The Fairly Odd Parents was more my show, or if Rugrats or whatever. It's like I can understand why it didn't appeal to a lot of people because it's a show that is not gearing towards making you laugh. It's not a show that is constantly filled with gags and adult jokes. It's not a SpongeBob. It's not anything like that. So, the fact that it was a lot more grounded than your traditional Nicktoon, I guess a lot of people just didn't really understand it. I mean, even if they were to watch it, they'll be like, oh man, this is so boring. It's like, this show is not making me laugh. I mean, I don't even want to watch this. I mean, I remember when I was doing my video on As Told by Ginger and why it's a groundbreaking overlooked Nicktoon. One of the complaints that I've actually did see from people, it's like, I want to see cartoons as an escape. Like I want to watch something action packed. I want to see something funny. I don't want to see something that I just went through a few hours ago. Like, why would I want to watch these kids going to school when I just came back from school? I mean, they're, people who don't like Doug and Hey Arnold say the same thing. It's like, these kids are going to school. It's like, I don't want to watch that. I want to watch Batman. So yeah, I think it's a show that you could appreciate when you're older. And also another thing, it's like because it was so grounded in a time in which when a lot of cartoons were being like more, gag based or more humorous. I mean, unless it was like an anime or something. But even then, anime was becoming a lot more action packed, like Inuyasha or Yu Yu Hakusho or anything like that. I mean, like there were some slice of life cartoons. I mean, Azumanga Daioh is a great example of that. But that's more for making you laugh as opposed to like being like so incredibly grounded with realism. But I think that a show like Ginger works somewhat nowadays as opposed to when it came out 20 years ago.
I think so, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a show that came out at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I do think it was slept on. We said that on the pod. Like people slept on the show as growing up. I did, because I remember when it used to come on TV and whatnot. I used to just flick the channel, not because I thought, oh, I'm not gonna like it, or I just thought, what's this program like? It's not Hey Arnold. It's not Rugrats. It's not any of them like sort of higher up or like elite kind of shows at that time. And I think when it sort of come out again, it was like I'm like early teens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not gonna be like a topic of conversation in my school at the playground going, oh, did you watch As Told by Ginger? And they're like, what are you watching? Kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So that was,
like nobody would even understand it. It's like when I was in the show came out when I was in high school, and everybody was getting into Invader Zim, and they were like, "Oh, remember that episode where Zim was just so obsessed with trying to get a hold of Dib so that he can be able to insert something into him, or remember the episode where he just had this giant zit and it was like controlling a whole bunch of people or something like that, like really weird stuff. Or when Gur put his mind into the house and he was like craving for tacos and they controlled the house and it ran all over the place. So I mean, like, it's kind of hard to say for Ginger. It's like, oh yeah, remember that episode where Ginger almost died from an appendix burst? That was great, wasn't it? Or, oh, do you remember that episode in which when, Carl's teacher died? Or, do you remember that episode in which when, Macy is going through, issues involving with her parents because her parents don't pay attention to her. They forgot her birthday and now they're treating her like a 4-year-old to make up for all the years of neglect that they did. That was great, wasn't it? That is not something that you talk about in the schoolyard, that's for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think one thing I did notice, obviously we talked about before, was Hey Arnold the Jungle. So I take it you're a big Hey Arnold fan?
Mm-hmm.
So I can count on you, like whenever we talk about Hey Arnold, I can get you on, right?
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
You're booked, kid. You're booked for Hey Arnold. So in terms of Hey Arnold, do you have a top list of episodes?
I do, because I also did a top 20 list as well.
So yeah, top 5 Hey Arnold episodes. Go.
Oh,
and
yes.
I will try and do mine as well. So
okay. Well,
pressure's on both of us. So there you go.
That's okay. But yeah, it's actually kind of funny that you mentioned about like, what are your top 5 favorite episodes of Hey Arnold? Because I remember when I was doing Hey Arnold back in 2016, and I was like, Patricia, I want to, after you do your history of Hey Arnold the Jungle movie, talk about your favorite episodes. And I was like, well, I was planning on doing that anyway, but since you asked, sure. But yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, so let's see if I can remember what it was because it was a while ago. Okay, so number 5 is Helga on the Couch.
I love that episode.
Yeah, that's actually Craig Bartlett's personal favorite.
Love that episode.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, it is the episode where Helga is being brought over to a therapist because they believe that she's going through severe anger issues when she punches Brainy in the nose and throws spitballs at Arnold. And then we get to know more about her backstory. We get to know about how her parents neglect her, about how she's being overshadowed by her perfect sister Olga, and how she has a crush on Arnold and she can't tell him. And her and Miss Bliss have this really great chemistry together. And seeing Helga's story being unfolded was so amazing because I mean, we kind of knew that she was going through these, but the fact that we had an entire episode dedicated to that, it was just amazing. Okay, so my number 4 is False Alarm. Very classic season 1 episode of Hey Arnold. For those who don't know what it is, so the fire alarm is being pulled at PS 118, and they think that Eugene did it. And so they essentially pull off a 12 Angry Men in which they gather up a group of kids who are the jurors, led by Arnold. And everybody thinks that Eugene is guilty, except for Arnold. And he points out the rational reasons on why Eugene didn't do it, because all of those evidences that they find, such as the pencil and the footprints and the peanut butter, all of those things could have been easily put in. And Arnold is right. Somebody else actually did frame Eugene because of revenge. And so yeah, there you go. That great episode, by the way. Fantastic. For those who are interested in checking it out. My number 3 is Arnold's Christmas.
Man, that gets me all kinds of emotional. I'm not even gonna front. Like, that is just gets me right here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great episode. I actually did an entire video of that separately for those who want to know more in depth about why Hey Arnold's Christmas is such a great episode. Discussing about like Mr. Wynn's backstory about the Vietnam War and having to give Mai over to the government and to the soldiers so that she can be able to re-raise safely, and Arnold and Gerald going over to see if they can find Mr. Wynn's daughter, and Helga trying to find the perfect gift for Arnold, and her having to give up the Nancy Spumoni snow boots so that Arnold can be able to give the gift for Mr. Wynn and all that stuff. It's such an emotionally packed episode, and there are so many articles and people discussing about why it may be the best Christmas special ever made. Asian Americans were heavily influenced by it. There's a great MSNBC article about it. Yeah, I mean, this episode has touched a lot of people. It's incredibly amazing. Number 2 is Pigeon Man. It's a fantastic episode about the mysterious pigeon man who lives up on the roof and is surrounded by pigeons. And Arnold's pigeon is sick and he needs to go over there to Pigeon Man to see if he can cure him. And it turns out that Pigeon Man is actually a really nice guy. It's just that he's just surrounded by birds because he likes birds, and people he just doesn't understand because they think he's weird. And so meanwhile, while he's being with Pigeon Man, Harold and, Stinky and Joey, Joey, yeah, minor character. He's the black kid with the punched eye and the missing tooth. They think that, why don't we go over to Pigeon Man and mess around with his stuff? And then things got out of control, and then his whole place is destroyed. And then Pigeon Man is just so distraught. And, that whole beautiful scene in which when Pigeon Man is flying away and, he's saying I'm going to go away where birds need me. It's such a beautiful moment. And for those who are listening, it's like, Patricia, why don't you talk about, the deleted thing where Pigeon Man was originally supposed to commit suicide? It's like, no, that is false.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. Apparently there was some sort of creepypasta thing that was spread around for years that people thought it was real, that the original ending was that Pigeon Man was so upset that his house was destroyed and that his pigeons were gone that he killed himself, which is not true, by the way. It is not true. Craig Bartlett himself, and I'm going to quote what he said. I don't know. I don't know if you allow explicit terms, but
go for it.
He said it was complete bullshit. His words, not mine. And that's why, and that is the reason why in the Jungle movie, Pigeon Man shows up in a cameo in the bell towers of Notre Dame. That's why he's there, because fans would not shut up of the fact that, Pigeon Man was supposed to kill himself. Nickelodeon wouldn't allow him to do that. It's like, no, that's not true. But so Pigeon Man is a fantastic episode. It's so emotional. It's so unbelievably memorable. I mean, like, they're one-off characters. People still remember them just as fondly as like the characters who've been around in the series. People remember Stoop Kid and Pigeon Man and Monkey Man and all these characters. People remember them for a reason because they're so complex. And my number one is a bit of a cheat, because I have two episodes in there, but they're kind of similar. My favorite episodes are Parents' Day / The Journal.
I knew you were going to say that.
I'm predictable. Yeah, so the reason why they're my favorite episodes is because this is the first episode that introduced us to Arnold's parents, and it shows us that Arnold's parents were there were explorers, there were doctors, they helped out the green-eyed people, and they had this great adventurous life together. And with Parents' Day, it focuses on it's parents weekend, and they have this competition, and Big Bob is being his usual jerky self, saying like, oh, we're not going to let some orphan and his ancestors defeat us in this competition. And Arnold is like really devastated because he doesn't he says that I don't have real parents, I just have my grandparents. And so that's when his grandpa tells him the true story of his parents, because he would always make up stories like they were circus performers, or there were all these kind of crazy things that were completely made up. And then of course it leads up to the competition, and then them doing very well, and then they defeat Big Bob, but they don't win the competition, but at least Big Bob didn't win. But it ends on a really nice note with Arnold having that great dream where he sees his parents' plane, and then he flies up into the sky, thinking that there's just a little bit of hope. And then the journal, it goes more in deep with his parents' backstory. We get to see how they first meet. We get to see the more details on the green-eyed people. We get introduced to La Sombra. We learn about El Corazon, which is the sacred artifact that belongs to the green-eyed people. We see Arnold being born, where he stopped the volcano. And Arnold's first year with his parents, and then they eventually have to go back. And then finally it leaves on a cliffhanger with Arnold finding the map to his to where his parents were last left. And I remember when before the Jungle movie came out, I remember just being so upset with that ending, because I knew it was never going to happen. But then finally it did, and now every time I finish watching the journal, I have to pop in the Jungle movie so I can get more context and saying like, okay, Arnold is going to find his parents, and everybody's going to live happily ever after. So at least I'll be happy, as opposed to being like, oh man, I wish that would have happened. Oh, I'm so sad now.
Yeah, I mean, my top 5 is very similar to yours. I think there's only one different one. So my number 5 was Summer Love, aka The Beach Story.
Oh,
I
yes,
really like this episode. It kind of explores Helga and Arnold, and it kind of shows that Helga's, genuinely cares for him and is like looking out for him, because obviously the girl that's trying to like make Arnold build this sandcastle with him, she's
Summer, yeah.
mugging him off, and Helga's trying to warn him, and then Arnold's like, oh, whatever, leave me alone. And then you have like the backstory of where Bob and Miriam, you had like one of them being really excited and then the other one not being excited, and then the roles reverse, where I think Bob gets like a massive sunburn, and then Miriam has to because Miriam goes to like a dance class and she's having like a time of her life. And then you got, I think, Grandpa stuck on this island somewhere, and he's trying to figure his way out. So that was I really like that one. My number 4 is Helga on the Couch. Again, such a good episode. Get to know Helga more, get inside her head. Number 3 for me was Arnold's Christmas. Again, Helga, star of the show. She's just brilliant. Honestly, if I'd ever met a girl like that, I'd marry her in a heartbeat, because that is like true love there. Like the sacrifice she made, and the way she just stands outside his house like, Merry Christmas, Arnold. It's just like, oh, just lovely. And then my number 2 and number 1 is The Journal and Parents' Day. I think in terms of the whole story about his parents, I mean, spoiler alert, guys, Arnold's parents are alive and well, and I, while Parents' Day broke my heart because it's like Arnold finding out about what really happened to his parents, the plane that they were supposed to come back on wasn't discovered and whatnot. They just basically turns out that they were all in a slumber, in a deep sleep. Maybe I'm doing the Jungle Movie a disservice a little bit, but yeah, for me, I just felt that. Yeah, I thought that they told that story. It was very heartbreaking, but there was a resolution almost. And even with the journal, when I think the way the journal ends, he's like, "Grandpa, Grandpa, I found it," and you're like, that little bit of intrigue was nice to have, and the fact that they went and decided to close it all up and have his parents alive. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just a big old cynic and I didn't like the whole beautiful happy ending, and I don't know.
Well,
But
I mean,
yeah, that was
if you're
my
well, I actually, Aaron and I, we actually did a the pros and cons of the Jungle movie. Part three is coming. Please stop asking me about that. But one of the things that we mentioned about the ending of the Jungle movie was that it was supposed to be a completely different ending if they would have done it when it originally came out in 2004.
yeah.
So, Steve Vixton, who was one of the writers of Hey Arnold, he wrote some of the best episodes of the series. He wrote episodes such as like Stoop Kid and all those episodes. And he also was the voice actor of Oscar Kokoschka. He originally wanted to have Arnold's parents killed off. Yeah, so he thought that it was way too unrealistic that Arnold's parents would have been gone for so long and they didn't do so much as like give a letter or a phone call. It's like, yeah, they're dead. So that was originally the ending. But I think because it had been like 15 years since, Hey Arnold was off the air and, that Craig Bartlett was like, yeah, we can't do that ending because it's going to be like a bittersweet ending for those who have been wanting to see it for so long. I guess I mean, the ending to Samurai Jack, the season 5 ending.
Oh, I've never seen Samurai Jack.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not gonna say it then. But yeah, there's okay. So for those who are familiar with Samurai Jack and see the end of season 5, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not gonna say anything further than that. But yeah, it was essentially like, oh man, like it ended like that, and it's so bittersweet, and sometimes it will be like anticlimactic or unsatisfying. So Craig didn't want to do that. He wanted to have a satisfying ending because it had been so long, and he knew how hard that the fans had been pushing this movie because Nickelodeon didn't want to do it. It was because of fan demand for the past almost 10 years that they wanted to see it. So that's why we have the ending that we do.
Okay. Well, I guess that's fair enough. I just felt for me, in terms of I don't know. It's a cartoon, isn't it? I'm sure if they wanted to bring people back from the dead or alive or whatever, they could do that. But I mean, at least we know Arnold's surname. That's one of the major pluses I thought about the film.
Sure.
And I love how obvious it is and how obvious it's not. Because obviously, Grandpa, what's he calling him? Hey, short man. Hey, short man. But
yeah, well, I mean, but it's pronounced Shortman. So it's kind of it's Arnold Shortman. So he first revealed it in a chat from a Hey Arnold fan website a long time ago where he revealed like, yeah, his name is Shortman. And they were like, what? Really? That's it?
Because I remember like when they were showing the passport, I just thought, oh my God, they're going to blank it out. They're never going to tell us his surname. And it was like right almost at the beginning of the film, it's like Arnold Shortman. And you're like, oh my God, that's his name, Shortman or Shortman.
Yeah,
because you're just thinking you don't as a kid, if you're watching it, you're not going to put two and two together. You're not going to think.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of like made a hint to it, like
play on words.
Yeah, exactly. He kind of like made a hint, and it's like, oh, it's something that Grandpa Phil says all the time, and it's like, oh, it's Shortman. Okay. So yeah, but it was still pretty funny, like seeing all the reactions from people. It's like, yeah, that was actually hilarious. But yeah, those are great choices for sure.
Absolutely. And honestly, I reckon we could be talking about cartoons and TV
Yeah,
shows all day long.
pretty much.
And I think I'll bring the chat to an end. But honestly, thank you so much for sitting down and shooting the breeze about cartoons. Really, it was.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate your time, and I think it's safe to say that this is not going to be the last we hear from you.
Thank you.
And so, Patricia, where can we find you on the socials?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. My Facebook is facebook.com/oldschoollane. Twitter is Patty_B_Miranda. YouTube.com/oldschoollane. You can listen to my podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Radio Public, or you can listen to it on YouTube. Thank you so much for having me over.
And we'll speak to you real soon, Patricia. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And hopefully when we do talk, the world is going to be a lot less grim, and hopefully we'll be a lot in a better position in terms of where we all are with this pandemic. So
right,
definitely. So you take care, and we'll speak soon.
All right.
I'm sure you're missing yesterday's capers, but you can listen to past episodes wherever you get your podcast from. And you can follow us on the socials. So on Instagram, it's Yesterday's Capers 1. I'm on Instagram at Abdullah_Moallim. On Twitter, I'm Abdullah Moallim, all one word. And you can follow Yesterday's Capers on Twitter at Yesterday Capers. So give us a follow, like, share, subscribe, do all of that. And we'll be back really soon with more Yesterday's Capers.